Let's go ahead and let's jump in. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. My name is Rachel Ruskowski, and I work as a director of study tours with Living and Learning International. And we have Brian Cole here with us. He's our in country director in Ecuador. And we're so excited. This is our first ever live webinar for Living and Learning International. And really are just so eager to see how this will be just a resource for all of you as faculty and staff to be able to learn today specifically about how study abroad increases cultural intelligence, and to share maybe some fun stories to talk about what that looks like today and in our society and on our campuses, whether they're in person or virtual, and really just to glean on some of our stories and experiences and to be able to all move forward as best as we can. So thank you all so much for joining. We're really, really eager to jump into this today. And thank you so much, Brian, for being on the webinar as well and gleaning on so much of your knowledge. We're so excited to hear all about that as well.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, I'll go ahead. I know I already stated what I do for Living and Learning. I work as the director of study tours, so specifically with short-term faculty-led programs. And I have always had a deep love for faculty-led programs. I actually studied abroad 4 times as a student, and those are the ways that I studied abroad and didn't plan on it, but found a career within study abroad. And it's just been really cool to see how that has grown, having grown in a multicultural home and at this point traveling to nearly 50 countries. I think cultural intelligence is something that is valuable and hopefully something that all of us are getting to a point that we use every day in our work life and in friendships and in family. And I know for me, that's something that has been key, even just in picking up the phone call and talking to my family in Spain and switching in the way that I talk or the way that I greet them or the way that I even make jokes. So it really has been just so much fun. So yeah, a little bit about me and my background in cultural intelligence and how that's impacted my life. How about you, Brian?
Yeah, thank you. I had the awesome opportunity of growing up in this beautiful city that I'm sitting in right now in Quito, Ecuador. I moved here when I was 5. So
Wow.
again, learning about cultural intelligence at a young age is really descriptive of who I am. I do not look Ecuadorian,
Mm.
but once I start speaking, many people will say, "Oh my goodness, you have the Quiteño, the Quito accent." So I loved growing up here. I was a missionary kid and a TCK, a third culture kid, if you know some of those terms. I did re-enter back to the United States for college, and I was there. I went from a 3 million person city that is Quito to a 15,000 person town in rural Arkansas. So it was a dramatic shift culturally for me. And then after college and ended up being grad school and working in student life for a few years, I ended up returning back to Ecuador and have been here working in the study abroad field and directing this program for the last 7.5 years.
Wow. Wow, that's awesome. I love that. And yeah, Brian, just your experience, it's funny because you definitely don't look Ecuadorian, but you're right. The minute you start speaking Spanish, same as me, I don't look Spanish at all. But the minute I start speaking Castilian Spanish, everyone knows. So like this girl is from somewhere. That's awesome. Well, let's go ahead and let's dive in. I'm really eager to see, just kind of jumping in, what does cultural intelligence look like? And then kind of pulling apart various layers to see how can we apply that on campus and really go through some of these best practices.
Yeah. And I think some of the best ways, right, to articulate what we're going to be talking about today are stories. And
Mhm.
so both Rach and I are actually going to share a little bit of a story of an experience that we've had,
Yes.
kind of coming up against or
Hmm.
challenging the cultural intelligences of us and also the people that we're interacting with. So, like I said, I went to school. I went to college in a small town in Arkansas, and I was at a Walmart one time with a group of students. The majority of them were from Central America, and they were speaking Spanish, and I was speaking Spanish alongside them because that is a gift to practice
Hmm.
language with others. And we were told and actually confronted by somebody there that said, "You need to speak English because we were in America after all." And we've seen
Wow.
videos, like this. But this was the first time that I've experienced really blatant and explicit prejudice toward a group of people.
Mm.
And what this conversation created was the highlighting and the need for partnership in this conversation of
Yeah.
myself along with the students who really were the ones that were being attacked in some senses, but
Mhm.
also how we are aiming to confront and challenge those around us with prejudices and biases, this and what this woman said. And so really the ability to navigate that really presented itself as a very difficult task and needing a lot of skills and competencies in order to get there. But it was such a cool conversation and actually lended itself to additional ones later where, man, standing up for and with Latinx students in this case, and how important that is for those of us in the cultural context we might deem as home.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I think that's so important. As you were saying, it's so much more than just abroad, but it's how do we translate this into here and, our own country, our own communities, and making sure that that cultural intelligence is there as well. I had a unique experience, I think, traveling. One moment that really sticks out to me the most in the really having to essentially lean into cultural intelligence was my time in Egypt, and knowing that what I normally would wear here or the way that I would look at people, everything down to the details of how I lived my everyday life had to be thought through a different lens of what makes sense to where I'm currently at. So, wearing clothes that covered my ankles and my elbows and my collarbone, and making sure that as I walk down the street, I'm huge on eye contact. I like looking at people when I talk to them, but even walking on a street, never looking at a male directly in his eyes, and covering my hair if it was wet, different things like that that I would actually normally do here at home in DC. But while in Egypt, I had to make those intentional shifts to be culturally appropriate and to be intelligent about how to fit into the culture that I was in. So I think it's interesting because cultural intelligence plays a role in so many different things, whether we're studying abroad, we're planning a program, or we're going on vacation with our family. It really goes into so many different areas. So, why don't we go ahead and let's dive in? Let's talk a little bit about cultural intelligence, what that actually looks like, and then pull apart those layers and how to apply it.
Yeah, so we're actually going to take 3 different routes or venues to describe cultural intelligence, and I'll talk about 2, and Rachel will talk about the third. But the Harvard Business Review actually presents a really cool definition of cultural intelligence, and it's an outsider's seemingly natural ability to interpret someone's unfamiliar and ambiguous gestures the way that that person's compatriots would, someone from their own culture. And really, it's the ability to adapt to new cultural settings and the deep importance that it is to be able to do that well, especially in the current dynamic of what we are living today. Now, people who are somewhat detached from their own culture can more easily adopt the norms and even the body language of an unfamiliar host. So again, detachment is something that happens fairly naturally in study abroad. But you can actually learn to detach even in your hometown, even in your own
Mhm.
family, as you desire and as you continue to engage with people who are different than you. So these 3 sources of cultural intelligence, I want to talk about those. The first being our heads, right? This is the most natural movement into learning about something. We learn about the beliefs, the customs, the taboos of a culture. This is tending to be what corporate training programs tend to favor. But really, it's just knowing about them. It's
Mhm.
understanding that there are differences, but really that's all that you know. And then it moves us from this head knowledge, and this actually has deep similarities, right, to even our faith journeys, but it moves us from head knowledge into our bodies. And it's not just
Mhm.
about knowing about differences or the uniqueness of culture, but your actions and demeanor communicate a lot of things. And really, how then you entered somebody else's world. And again, study abroad grants a lot of access to this because you tend to get on a plane and go somewhere new. But whether that is in the way that you shake hands or greet someone, in Ecuador's culture, it is the besito on one side of the face, which is important to note because that can be difficult to learn. Or the ability to mirror customs or even order something correctly.
Mhm.
I even think about the Starbucks lingo and the Starbucks culture, right? That is a certain way of ordering coffee, and you will learn to do that
Yeah.
in a new cultural context. But really, by adopting people's habits and mannerisms, even, you learn to understand really what it is like to be them. And that is one of the coolest ways that we learn deeply and holistically. The last source that we move into is our heart. And in that, adapting to a new culture involves overcoming obstacles and challenges and even setbacks, even failures of us interacting in a culture that, oh, we were uncomfortable to begin with in. And
Mhm.
people can do that really by gaining in confidence. As they have more and more experiences with people who are different than them, or a cultural dynamic that is different than where they grew up in, then they really grow in their confidence and their self-efficacy of understanding that they can.
Mhm.
Because really, confidence
Um,
is rooted in mastering tasks or circumstances. And cultural intelligence grants you the ability to enter into a wide variety and diverse spectrum of circumstances well. So that's really our goal. And really, you will not disarm a foreign host by simply showing that you understand their culture. You have to prove that you've entered it. And that's a really
mhm.
important piece. And again, why study abroad is such a cool mechanism and venue for that to happen.
Wow.
I want
I love that too,
to,
because, oh,
yeah, go
sorry. I was
ahead.
just going to say, I feel like for students when they study abroad, I feel like that shows a sense of humility too. I think a lot of times we go into a new culture thinking that we have found the right way. And when people do something different, it takes a lot of humility to just see it in their perspective and to do it the way that they do it, even if it's different than what we're used to. Like the kiss, that can be uncomfortable for maybe some students, but by the end, they're kissing everybody.
Right? It's such a cool thing to see them move.
Mhm.
And really, what we see happen is this spectrum of cultural intelligence that we see from when students first arrived, maybe on the ground in Ecuador, to the day that they would leave.
Mhm.
And really, where people begin, and I might even ask that those of you who are watching or participating today be so bold and vulnerable enough to place yourself on the spectrum of cultural intelligence. And it is okay. It is all right to acknowledge that maybe you're in the ignorant or aware phase, because there's room for growth. And that's what we're about. So the CQ ignorant individual has not identified culture as an issue at all. They really don't see differences
Mhm.
in culture or really value them. It's just kind of this piece of, yeah, culture's out there, but not really a big deal for me. And really, they respond according to their own cultural schemas. Again, that comfortability that comes from growing up in the culture that you grew up in, really without choice of your own in a lot of ways. But you kind of hold negative stereotypes toward other people who are different than you. And then you move to becoming a CQ aware individual when you've identified that culture is an issue. And really, what they desire to do is learn more about cultural differences and how they can overcome some of the cultural problems. Maybe this has caused, some of the movements in the States has caused people to become more aware. And that's kind of a cool outcome of what's occurring there. And then you move into the becoming a learner. And this is where you actively seek information, support, resources from diverse people in diverse settings. You set goals and you undertake education and might even be mentored by somebody who is dramatically different than you. Even generationally, what a cool opportunity to learn from people. But really, you begin to acquire skills and knowledge and abilities needed to be successful across cultures. The novice, though, moves from knowing about those things and acknowledging even the differences in culture and applies them in diverse exchanges. They actually get out there a little bit and they're mindful of their judgment and maybe their perspectives, and they practice verbal and nonverbal cues and again, even fail miserably sometimes, right? Language learning, you become a fool sometimes in learning a language. But those novice, culturally intelligent people will actively pursue trying on a new culture and really testing their ability to embrace it and even engage well in it. And the coolest thing about this is that it takes a lot of effort. And this is so important.
Mhm.
And I promise you that the people that are in the new culture, especially in Ecuador, the Ecuadorians that view our students as novice learners, who desire to engage, who want to practice, who make mistakes in language and even in cultural norms, they love it when students try. And they are
Yeah.
incredibly gracious as they do. And I think that you will find that especially in Latin cultures. But let me move to a skilled individual. And this is, again, the goal of what we would hope that we would become and what our students would become. that they continue to practice and refine their intelligence. They realize that it's not a one and done experience, but it is a gradual and continual process of learning. And that with enough experience, what becomes amazing is that they can flex so naturally that it is almost effortless, that it seems as if it is an automated, an unconscious choice to engage and become, in a lot of senses, like a national from that culture. It's the ability of a bicultural person, right? Even a TCK, to move between cultures really seamlessly. And this showed up in my growing up, right? Where, again, I do not look Ecuadorian, and yet I speak the language. I love the cultural realities of here. Relationship over task, a lot of things that I learned as a kid. And my movement back and forth from the States to here and then back and forth really has created this dynamic of really quick adaptation, that I just move really quickly into United States culture, into North American culture, and then I move back into Ecuadorian culture, sometimes within hours. There's some good pieces, right, of reflection in that, of is that healthy? And that's maybe a discussion for a future webinar. But this automated process and really almost unconscious effort that happens in becoming a skilled CQ individual is a really cool place to get to.
Wow, that's awesome. I love that. I think what a powerful place to be at, to know cultures so well that just like a quick flip of a switch, immediately you can adapt to the people you're around, the country that you're in, the setting that you have to adapt to. I think that's powerful. That's awesome. Well, another way to look at cultural intelligence is capabilities, and really 4 different capabilities in what it looks like, to really lean into that. I think a lot of times when people talk about cultural intelligence, they're really looking at it with these far extremes, and it's either my culture or another one, this or that. Maybe millennials versus boomers, so many far extremes rather than leaning into it with a level of excitement. And I think that's really what it is. Leaning into another culture should be exciting. It shouldn't be looked at as daunting or scary. If anything, it's just something new, something different to discover. So there's 4 different capabilities we're going to dive into. And of course, the first one is drive. So what that looks like, it's the level of interest, the persistence and confidence, and really just that curiosity to feel motivated to get to know people different than you. And I think that's so key. That's really where it starts. After that is knowledge, understanding different kinds of cultures and what it looks like one versus the other, but doing that in a healthy manner. Not so much as in leaning to stereotypes. I think that can become very dangerous when you're in another country and you're like, oh yeah, I heard that these people do that here. That is just not a good way to get to know people or to even lean into that excitement. Instead, letting our opinions go off of our experience there and letting that be genuine based on being in another country or around another people group. Next is going to be strategy. At this point, we've been curious, we're leaning into it more, and now we've become a little bit more comfortable in strategizing around what that looks like. So, going back to, for example, my time in Egypt, I packed my suitcase knowing that I was going to a very different place than my own. I didn't bring any shorts with me. I was not wearing that in Egypt, but being strategic, even down to what actually came in my luggage with me. So learning how to plan effectively. And then action, ability to really adapt. And I think this kind of goes back to Brian's, last section of letting that be the light switch, and quickly taking action to maneuver and pivot from one to the other and interweaving between cultures in a beautiful way, almost like if it was a dance, and not viewing them as one versus the other, but appreciating the beautiful differences that makes culture so vibrant and fun to get to know because they are different. So I am excited because we have the expert with us, the Dr. Brian Cole, who finished his dissertation on the impact of study abroad on student openness and diversity. And I'm really excited about this part, Brian. What you have found in your studies is just really, really thrilling within study abroad, to know that everything that we believe is out there can be proven, and you have the numbers for it. So Take us through some of your research and what you found.
Yeah, this actually relates beautifully, Rach, to what you said about appreciating difference. And really, one of the measures of cultural intelligence is this openness to diversity scale. It was a tried and true and valid, incredible tool that was used to gauge students' openness to difference. And so it's good to start with definitions here, but openness to diversity was defined for my study as the ability to both recognize, acknowledge difference, and appreciate it. And that could look like differences in ideas and values and beliefs, and certainly across races and ethnic realities. Now, professionally, openness coupled with intelligence could mitigate a lot of things. It mitigates negative stereotyping. It lessens prejudice in the workplace. And it really is this moderating role for providing better performance on teams, especially as you work with people who are different than you. And crazy enough, we do this often, right? We should. So let me talk to you a little bit about the study. So I was able to survey and also interview and also look at journals of students. It was a mixed method study of 27 students who studied abroad with us a couple years ago. And you can see the demographics there, but it was kind of a really fun mix of students. We tend to be pretty heavy female and living and learning and study abroad as a whole. But this was a really cool dynamic to study. And I absolutely, of course, love studying our own students. But really what was found in the study is, and we did 2 different times for the surveys. This is important to note. This was a paired sample t-test of dependent groups. And we actually had, again, 27 respondents, but what we found was the differences between the mean scores in time 1, which was given about halfway through their study abroad, and time 2, which was given about a month post their return back to the United States and North America. And what we found was there was significant statistical change in the means between the 2 times surveyed with students who had not studied abroad before. Again, maybe a topic for an additional dissertation is why the students who had already studied did not have statistical difference. But it is always exciting for people studying and writing a dissertation to find that difference. And what we found was, wow, there is significant change in relation to openness to diversity between survey times for those students. Now, what we found was, all right, cool, there's differences. Well, what caused them? What were some of the reasons why differences happen? So we asked some additional questions in the survey. And this was actually rating students' experiences abroad and how it facilitated openness. And I'm convinced facilitates cultural intelligence as well. And what we found is that actually homestays and internships were some of the biggest factors for change. Well, doesn't that make sense with what we talked about, that you entering into somebody else's home, somewhat begrudgingly by some of our students, but they learn to live and breathe and even communicate differently with their homestay families. They ate food that was different than what they were used to. They did outings and on weekends that were different. They interacted with, oh wow, it's certainly going to rain here quickly. That's the thunder you hear in the back. But man, they figured out how to manage the differences, but also really come to a valuation of the differences with the families that they were with. And their internships did the same thing. Also, kind of interesting to note is that the student activities that we planned and even the over-programming sometimes of events were not seen as near as impactful as the experiences where they actually engaged in a different culture. So in conclusion, talking about, this dissertation and this study, which was a lot of fun, was really this idea that study abroad has some credible evidence of creating, really alongside the institution back in the United States, global citizens and functional graduates. And that was a really fun kind of outcome of this. So we'll talk a little bit later about some of the recommendations and action steps that some of us can take in continuing to persist in these changes in openness, but this is a good start.
Yeah, I love this. I love this graph to look at it. I think one thing that really sticks out to me, Brian, is the value of relationship. I think homestays clearly demonstrate that. And like you were saying, a lot of times we put so much emphasis into the events that we're doing and thinking, okay, our activities, this fun movie night or this like culture appreciation night or this tango evening, whatever it is that we're putting together to highlight different cultures, nothing ever tops relationship. And I think that is so evident in how students felt that homestays was the most important aspect. Whether they, begrudgingly went into it in the beginning or not, I think everyone would leave at the end saying that was one of the best things they've ever done. And it's cool to see that the research also shows that.
Yeah. Well, let's move Rach into a little bit of a different, arena of conversation.
Mhm.
But we're actually going to bring on an alumni of our program as well as another study abroad program. But he will be joining us here in a second via video. And his name is Jason, and I'm going to let him introduce himself a little bit and also talk about his study abroad experience.
Hey guys, Rachel, Brian, thanks for having me today. I love being able to be a part of this conversation because I mean, I don't know if you could tell just by looking at me, but cultural intelligence is something that I've been having to learn from a very young age. I grew up in a multicultural household where my dad is half Black and half Japanese, and my mom is white. And then they put us in an immersion school from kindergarten all the way up through high school where we learned Spanish and English at the same time. Matter of fact, I learned how to read and write in Spanish before I did in English as a kid. And so one of the things that my parents, especially my dad, wanted to do with him being, his mom being 100% Japanese and his dad being 100% Black, was teach us these importances of diversity and the importance of understanding what cultural differences are and how those can benefit us. And so, I mean, that even went in a little bit further into, growing up, my parents would have us have exchange students from all over the world. So we had exchange students living with us from, Mexico. We had people from Brazil that stayed with us. We had people from France that stayed with us, just because my parents really value this idea of cultural intelligence. And so I guess that's not necessarily a little bit about me, but that's a little bit more about my background and my love for what you guys are talking about today. I guess a little bit about me is I went to school also in Arkansas, at a small little school in Arkansas, and got a degree in Spanish, and then with a minor in youth ministry, because ministry and being with kids and helping youth and adolescents get to that next stage in life is something that's been really important to me. But now living in Kansas City, doing urban ministry with Hispanic students here in KC.
Cool. Yeah. And Jason, you have had a few study abroad experiences, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. So I got to study abroad actually in Ecuador, in Quito. I was there for a summer, and then came back to the States for a couple of weeks and was like, I haven't had enough. And so decided to get on another plane and left and went to Spain and lived down in Sevilla, Spain for about 7.5 months and did a whole semester down there. And so, man, there's just something to be said about, like what you guys were talking about earlier, about living with people and being in that culture. I mean, I've been learning that culture in school for years. I studied Spanish since kindergarten all the way up through college. But there's something to be said about the cultural experience of living with people.
And maybe Jay,
Incredible.
you can speak to, some of those experiences and some of those stories that increased your cultural intelligence or challenged it, any and all of those.
Yeah, I think this one, it's kind of funny, and I hope that it kind of helps make the point of the importance of it. But the story that comes to my mind is my first day living in Spain. We all were supposed to get on our flights in our own separate areas and then fly to Chicago to meet up as one big group so we could all go to Spain together and all be there at the same time. Well, of course, my plane from Tulsa is delayed. So I don't get to Chicago on time, which means I miss my connecting flight to Spain. So now I'm with nobody that I know. I'm in a new place that I hadn't even been to Chicago at that point. So like, let alone going to Spain, and so I get on this plane, get to Spain, and we rolled in. Oh, that kind of rhymed. Get on a plane, get to Spain, but I, sorry, I get in this cab after I land, literally all of my bags, all of the stuff that I'm going to be needing for the next 8 months on my back, and get in this cab. And I speak Spanish great. My Spanish has been great since I was a little kid. So I tell him where I need to go. I give him the address, and he drives me in and drops me off on this like big alley of just like cobblestone road where like cars don't drive on. And he just kind of points down and says like, yeah, it's in the middle. So I'm like, okay, like middle, I can find the middle. Well, I was thinking maybe 3 or 4 houses. No, there's 50 on each side. So it's like, man, okay. So I'm carrying all of my stuff, this foreigner in this new place. I even speak the language, but like, I was like, okay, well, I can do this. Let me get to where I need to go. Finally find where I'm supposed to be, ring the little doorbell to say, hey, can you let me up? Because I'm here. It's 9 o'clock at night and I want to sleep. And the guy comes on the phone and was like, you're at the wrong place. Like, this is not where you're supposed to be. And I just remember thinking like, man, I've never felt so lost than I was right then. And I've never felt so unknown and so disconnected. Like, I didn't have a phone that was working at that time. I didn't have maps. I had a piece of paper with an address on it. That was it. Um, all of that to say, I finally get to where I'm supposed to be. I spend the next 20 minutes looking on my own, and then finally just ask somebody. It was like, hey, can you help me? And they point to the house that was right behind me when I started, but that's a whole nother thing. But then fast forward now to where I'm working with, immigrant Hispanic families, both legal and illegal. And with everything going on with COVID and school starting back up, and kids having to be where in these classes, just kind of added another burden to the immigrant family in our community. And so as I was kind of thinking about all the different burdens that they're having to go through, I remember thinking back at that moment last month. I was just like, I remember what it was like to feel lost. I remember what it was like to know that, like, I'm not going to see my family, or I'm disconnected from people, or I don't have friends, I don't have family, I don't have a way to find what I need. And thinking, man, is there a way that we can take on that burden of the educational side of things for these parents? Not necessarily for the students. The students need it, yes, but those parents that have given up everything, that were in that same place that I was, but more permanently, that are in a place where, hey, I'm giving up my whole family, everything that I know, my home, to have a better life. And so we came up with these learning pods where we are going to take on the educational kind of burden of these parents so that they can, help take care of all of the other stuff that they have to take care of. And I think to kind of round that out, learning a different language was great for me. It helped me professionally. It helped me in a lot of different ways. But being in a different culture really helped me as a human, just as a person, and view humanity a little bit different, in that now I can relate to what it feels like a little bit more. And I can empathize a little bit more with these immigrant families, because I've had to do it where I've lived somewhere completely different, where I didn't speak the language as fluently as I would like. I didn't know the roads as much as I wanted to. I didn't have a job. Like, I was there. And so it just helps me to understand where we're at a little bit better.
And so much compassion, right? You talked about empathy and compassion
Yeah.
that are grown by understanding some of that. And then you think about those people who are experiencing that challenge and that need, and what a gift it is to have somebody come up and maybe even speak your language, but be able to say, hey, I understand and I care about you. What an important facet of today. So Jason, as always, it is a gift to see you, and thank you for sharing today about your experiences abroad and also in your career now.
Of course.
God bless
Thanks for
you
having me, guys.
as you do that, because that is
Yes, thank you so much.
Of course.
Awesome. I love to hear that. I think what's so unique is when students are learning something while abroad and then able to see those clear connections in their future career. And I think that's so evident in Jason's story, that what he experienced as a study abroad student are ways that make it easier for him to empathize with those he works with. And I just think what a valuable thing to be able to relate to people through actual experience and real understanding. So as we kind of shift gears and think a little bit about, at this point, we all understand what, all of this means, and cultural intelligence, and hopefully we're all now at that novice level, or at least leaning towards it. But how do we apply this into the world that we live in right now? I think we find ourselves in a very unique position. I can only imagine that back in February and beginning of March, none of us anticipated what this year was going to unfold and really how things would develop. And really, I think COVID has pushed us all to a place of needing to pivot in so many areas of life. Brian and I were laughing earlier thinking that, everything is virtual now, from church to hanging out with your friends and how you get your education and even how you order your groceries. I mean, essentially you could do everything virtually. So how do we make sure that that is also a key part in how we plan? I think a lot of us are very aware that higher education is shifting so much, and that this concept of having to be virtual is going to have a very strong presence in a lot of the development that we create. So how do we make sure that that is still a main focal point? So with all of that, not only are students having to pivot to take classes virtually, and us as faculty and staff creating programs or courses that are delivered in that method as well, but also recognizing that students are going to be entering a workforce that is virtual, and that this isn't just going to leave when the pandemic is over or things start to shift back to our new normal, whatever that may look like. How do we ensure that we have equipped people to still translate those lessons that they learn face to face in cultural intelligence, but doing that through the mode of a computer, through a Zoom, through a Google Hangout, all of those ways for them to feel set up for success in their future employment. And I think it's important for us to even recognize that cultural intelligence isn't bound to students getting on an airplane. Absolutely. Nothing is ever going to replace a face-to-face experience. I think technology is great, but many times it holds us back from some of the lessons that we can learn. So nothing ever replicates or is able to cover up what a face-to-face study abroad experience can deliver. But I think there is so much value and so much potential when we think about what does this virtual capacity have for us and how can we really lean into that. And, you know, one of my favorite things that Living and Learning has launched this past summer in the midst of COVID-19 is our global virtual internship. And I had the honor and privilege of walking alongside 3 students this summer as their dedicated mentor and being able to track along with them every single week to see what they're learning in their internship. It was phenomenal. And one student in particular, she actually was virtually interning in Ethiopia. And her specific role was to work on an executive summary that would be used for this NGO called I4Life to seek out government funding for these just incredible projects that they're working on. And the student, she's from California, was able to virtually intern in Ethiopia for a leprosy colony just outside of Addis Ababa, a community that she would have never otherwise been able to impact or to reach or maybe even know existed. And at the end of this, the student was just so overwhelmed by how much she had learned, how much she had been humbled. And to be able to then say, I've never been more excited to go to not just Africa, but Ethiopia specifically, and to go to this community and to see the people that I specifically worked with and for all these weeks. And I think that's beautiful. That would have never happened without this virtual learning. And not only does that help students, but it also creates an opportunity for those that wouldn't be able to study abroad, maybe athletes, maybe parents with children, maybe those that are working multiple jobs to pay through school. All of a sudden, cultural intelligence has been opened up to students that have studied abroad or haven't, want to double dip and go again, but it just creates it more accessible. And I think that is so, so valuable. So not only do we want to create these opportunities, but we also want to see, how does this help students? How does it actually translate into, one of my favorite topics is career readiness. And I think a lot of times we like to throw that word around. I think it makes us sound like we know what we're talking about and we've got it all together for our students, but that is not an easy feat to put together all of these opportunities and to ensure that students are present in the now, but also thinking about the future. And the National Association for Colleges and Employers has found 8 key competencies that students actually grow in, all 8 of these while studying abroad. And I think that is phenomenal to see that they're going to grow in everything from communication to teamwork to career management. Students are going to leave a study abroad experience being a better, fuller version of themselves and hopefully more confident while doing it. And I think that's so cool. Of course, my favorite is going to be that global and intercultural fluency. I think usually that's the no-brainer, knowing that students that have studied abroad are growing in that specific area. So how do we support students? I think it's important. We have our, pre-departure sessions and our re-entry retreats and all of that, but also making sure that students are given the vocabulary that they need, that they actually know how to articulate, not just, I learned a lot while I studied abroad, but what did you learn? How did that impact you? And how does that continue to impact you on a daily, weekly, monthly basis? So I think a lot of times with career readiness, it's that practical tools for students. And that's going to be helping them out with their cover letter, their resume, and in an interview. So in a cover letter, I like to think of this as the interview before the interview. So making sure that students are listing out their study abroad experience in detail, maybe explaining how digital technology was a prevalent part of their global virtual internship for them to actually access another country. And because they were interning in another country digitally, that helped them with global and intercultural fluency, because then they're working with a community that speaks a different language. All of a sudden, a student is unraveling a beautiful story while infusing these competencies into the way they describe their experience. Of course, in a resume, this is a great way to show that students have gained these different competencies and gained cultural intelligence. And they're able to do it in a variety of ways. They can list it absolutely under the education section of their resume. I think that's the no-brainer for all of us. In addition to that, if they were in an internship, making sure they put it in the experience section, writing out what they actually did. And if they were taking classes abroad, also putting that underneath language and maybe a skill set portion of their resume. And then lastly, my favorite is an interview. Coaching students through specific stories that are going to highlight what did they learn while abroad. As our world continues to grow more virtually, I think these international touch points become easier and more accessible. So how do we ensure that students know how to talk about that? To emphasize that they know how to engage with people from different cultures and different backgrounds. So all of that really adds up to ensure that students are able to communicate that. And I think, this graph here, it's interesting because I think students believe that they've grown in a lot of this, but the perception by employers actually doesn't quite add up to what students are saying that they feel that they've grown in. And I think that could be a variety of things. It could simply be the way that they articulate it, maybe the way that they demonstrate it. And I think that really shows that it's our job as study abroad professionals, whether as faculty or staff, how do we make sure that students take that cultural intelligence that they've learned abroad and continue to apply that while back home? How do we help them to actually have the right vocabulary to explain what they've learned and to make that a habitual practice as they move forward, but not letting that stay just within their study abroad experience? And I really think that that's where a lot of this graph is coming from, is helping students to make sure that they're articulating that to future employers so that those numbers can actually match up more, where a student believes that they've grown and someone else sees that growth as well.
Yeah, right. And this is all working toward, so many different ways that competencies and skill sets and capabilities that we talked about earlier grow. Well, it's really to create global citizens, right? That is our endeavor as study abroad. That is the endeavor of our institutions in the US. And again, I think that where we are sitting currently in today's climate of the ability to have hard conversations and even disagree well might be indicative of really students needing to get outside of their comfort zone a little bit more and engage in a new culture. So what on earth do global citizens look like, right? What are the things that we're working toward? And one of those is to be listeners. And this is actually good and compelling for students to practice, and it's also good and compelling for professors, faculty, and staff. Even those of you who are receiving maybe a family member or even a son or a daughter that maybe is coming back from a study abroad experience, really, global citizens listen. Global citizens pay attention to the stories. They challenge our implicit and explicit biases, right? And study abroad does that pretty naturally. But what a cool thing for a secondary outcome of study abroad is for that student to come home and speak to their families and their friends, and maybe even cause some changes among them and their implicit and explicit biases. To have ongoing relationship with people from the country or place where they were, even if that's virtually, right? The students who did our global virtual internship and then continuing in relationship afterward, that we would be encouragers, that we would be people that would celebrate that. That we could even connect study abroad students to international students or others who are entering into a new cultural reality, and that they might be people to mentor. We've actually had alumni in our program that have desired to mentor future students that come abroad. And man, the impact that they have on our students of entering into homestays with some excitement rather than deep fear, that can happen by students using their experience as well. And lastly, I hope that we grant leadership opportunities and even speaking opportunities for those students on our campuses to lead maybe trips or study tours in the future, but at a minimum to share about their experiences and learning with other students. Because just like in our program, we have seen that the best recruiters for us are students. In the same context, the best teachers, I'm convinced, of cultural intelligence to other college students are college students themselves. So that is what we get to do, and the gift of seeing that in students, I'm convinced, gives us great encouragement and affirmation in what we are doing today.
Yeah, I love that. I love the concept of empowering the student's voice. I think far too often they come back from an abroad experience, whether it be face-to-face or virtually, and students aren't actually asked, how was your time? How was your experience? And I'll never forget, before working with Living and Learning, I was overseeing the study abroad office at Southeastern University. And one of my student workers there had also studied abroad, and he had done a semester in Costa Rica. And I remember him telling me, he said, you know, Rachel, I loved Costa Rica. It changed my life so much. But he said, at one point, my family just said, Jonathan, we get it. Like, you went to Costa Rica. Please stop talking about it. And I couldn't imagine how hard it must have been to feel like he was excited to celebrate his experience and to share what he had learned. And yet, by some of the people that should have been celebrating that the most, we're just kind of done and said, okay, that's enough. Like, we don't want to hear anymore. And I think that's our role as, you know, study abroad professionals, to realize students need that outlet to even just verbally process what they just experienced. It is a lot for someone at that age, 18, 19, 21, 22, to go to another country, to be in another culture completely. They need people that understand them. And who better to understand than study abroad professionals and faculty and staff that believe in study abroad, celebrate it, and, you know, are willing to have one extra cup of coffee, whether that's in person or virtually, and listen to their stories. So I love that. I think it is key that we empower the student voice on a daily basis, especially when they're needing to debrief all of this. So how do we move forward? How do we now know that students are gaining so much through cultural intelligence, through their virtual and study abroad experiences? And how do we ensure that we're setting up the best campus experience, whether they're coming back to an online campus, a hybrid campus, a traditional one, all the other 50 plus modes, it feels like, of what is higher education today. But I would say these are 3 tangible takeaways. And the first one is going to be evaluating where we're at currently. How do we review what cultural intelligence processes we have on campus, and then identify areas of improvement? We are never going to know where to go or what to change unless we know what we currently have. So taking an inventory and maybe being a little hard on yourself, yet also having grace and knowing that you've done the best you can until this point. But what do you currently have that's setting students up for success? What are they doing before they go on their program? Is someone sitting down with them and walking them through, hey, this is what you can anticipate? And that's so much more than, this is what TSA looks like at the airport. Yes, you take your shoes off or you take your laptop out of your bag. It's more than that. It's how to exchange money, and hey, it's okay if you get lost, or this is what this looks like, etc. One of my favorite things for that is connecting study abroad students with international students. I think that is such a beautiful way to include relationship for students to then lean into how to prepare, how to feel excited. In addition, while they're gone, I don't think as study abroad professionals, we should just forget about our students while they're abroad, but checking in with them regularly and making sure that it's not just the study abroad provider who is there for the students, but still the home campus, and letting the student know, hey, we're still here for you. We're still thinking about you. And then, of course, once they come back, how do we properly help students with a real re-entry process, and letting that be more than just a quick hour coffee? I know when I worked at Southeastern, we had built out this reentry retreat weekend, and it was just so much fun to dive into deep conversation. We actually would mix our students from various semester programs, and they loved it. They would become friends. They would talk about their experiences from all over the world. And I remember there was one semester in particular, we had students studying abroad domestically more than internationally. And I thought to myself, this is going to be the most interesting reentry retreat. They all studied abroad in the US. No one is going to have any crazy stories. And yet those students needed the reentry retreat so much. And it was unique because I had some students doing a wilderness program. And what they shared literally took me so back. They said, Rachel, I have a hard time sitting in a classroom with no windows because I just spent the entire last semester completely outdoors. And now I'm in a room. So even moments like that, our students are needing to debrief and process. So how do we make sure that our pre, during, and post everything, resources to them, events, etc., is helping them out? I think something that really is going to be key in all of that is connecting students and creating different systems with different departments that may be non-academic. We would be naive to think that learning can only happen inside a classroom. And I think that's what makes study abroad so unique, is that you're engaging all 5 of the senses as much as possible all the time. So how do we make sure that students are continuing that learning process when they come back? So connecting with various places on campus, such as a diversity club or Res Life, maybe seeking out a resident director and saying, hey, just want to let you know, these 5 students in your dorm just came back from living in another continent. We think that they could glean on a little bit more check-ins from you and ensuring that they are given the resources that they need. And of course, connecting with international students, connecting with a career office, so many different avenues where students can find that intentional community beyond just the study abroad office when they re-enter. And then one of my favorite things, and Brian, I'm sure with your dissertation, is tracking data on campus to demonstrate how cultural intelligence is increased through various avenues on campus and abroad. So much more than just study abroad, but what are the other intentional key points that increase cultural intelligence, and how are we tracking that? What I love about study abroad so much is not only is it a marketing tool to bring students in, but it's actually a retention method. Students are more likely to continue through graduation having studied abroad. So making sure that you're actually tracking data. I know it's cumbersome, but putting out those surveys, having students fill these out before they go abroad, maybe while they're abroad, and when they come back, maybe even 2 semesters after they finish studying abroad. And then sharing that data with key people. Your marketing office will be very happy to know how many countries your students are going to, and how many of them have, boosted their GPA after having studied abroad, or landing a job that much faster because of the experience they had in another culture. And then of course, an alumni office. Alumni are always going to be supportive of these beautiful things that you're doing in and through your campus and the programming that you're setting up for your students. So I think there are so many tangible ways that we can help and assist our students, but these are practical steps of what's next, reviewing what you currently have, finding areas for improvement, identifying other departments on campus that can assist in that, and then of course, tracking that data and then sharing it with others. So I know we're kind of getting a little close here on time, and I'll take that one because I can be quite a talker, but I think we are just about to wrap up. So I don't think we have any questions at the moment. I know we left our chat bar open, and Brian, we might have answered all of them on our own, which is great.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just want to say thank you everyone for joining. This has just been so exciting to talk through study abroad, and whether it be face-to-face or virtual, and so many different capacities that we see today, but to be able to just get excited about supporting our students in so many different avenues.
Yes, absolutely. So, thank you, Rach, for
awesome.
putting this together and hosting it. It was a gift.
Of course. Thank you so much, Brian. It's been great to do this with you, and I guess I'll see you next month.
All right. Sounds good.
Sounds good. Thank you all so much.